Ever feel like, your vote doesn't really count as much as someone else's?
Well, in India, that feeling is at the heart of a huge debate right now about this thing called delimitation.
Yeah, delimitation. It's basically like redrawing the lines of our voting districts, based on how many people live there.
Okay, so like those maps you see during election season with all the different colored districts.
Exactly. So the more people you have in a district, the more influence it has when it comes to electing representatives.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Think of it like a classroom where, each section gets to elect a class rep, but some sections have way more students than others.
Right, so some kids' votes would matter more than others.
Exactly. And that's kind of what India is trying to figure out right now. The last time they redrew these boundaries was way back in 1975. And, well, things have changed a bit since then.
Yeah, I can only imagine. India's population has exploded in the last 50 years.
Oh, it has. To give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, in 1975, one MP represented about 1 million people.
Today, it's closer to 2.5 million.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
Huge. Just imagine that for a second. 2.5 million people, all relying on one person to represent them.
Yeah, that really puts things into perspective.
It does, right. So you see why this whole delimitation thing is such a big deal.
I do. So what's the holdup? Why haven't they adjusted these boundaries for so long?
Well, there have been a few roadblocks, both political and logistical.
I bet.
But the main issue is it's a real political hot potato. You have states, particularly in the South, that have done a great job managing their population growth. They're worried that if seats are just redistributed based on population, they'll lose some of their political power.
So they're being penalized for doing the right thing.
That's their argument, and it's not hard to see their point. On the other side, you have states in the north that have seen massive population increases,
Right.
and they're saying, hey, our citizens deserve more representation too. It's only fair.
So it's a tug of war between the states.
Exactly, a tug of war for political power.
It sounds like the Delimitation Commission has a really tough job ahead of them.
Absolutely. They've got this balancing act, trying to make sure everyone feels like they're being represented fairly.
Right, and I imagine there's no easy solution to this.
There really isn't, and to make things even more complicated, there are a bunch of different solutions being proposed.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, one option is to just go by the latest census data and redistribute seats accordingly.
Okay, sounds simple enough.
Right. But politically, it's a total minefield.
I can imagine. You're talking about shifting power from one state to another.
Exactly. And that never goes over well.
So what else is on the table?
Well, there's this idea of using a weighted formula.
A weighted formula.
Yeah, basically it means states that have kept their population under control get a little bonus in the calculations.
Interesting. So it's like rewarding them for responsible policies.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is it would require amending the Indian Constitution.
And that's not exactly a walk in the park, is it?
Nope, not at all. Then there's the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach.
Which is?
Just keep things the way they are and add new seats based on population growth.
So no one loses any power.
Exactly. It avoids all the immediate drama, but it doesn't really solve the problem of unequal representation in the long run.
Right. It's just kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. And on top of that, think about the logistics. More MPs means a bigger parliament, building more staff, more pensions.
The costs would add up quickly.
Oh, they would, and someone has to pay for it, right?
And I'm guessing that someone is the taxpayer.
You got it. So, you see, this issue really touches everyone in India one way or another.
I'm starting to see that. And we haven't even talked about the most interesting part yet. The women's reservation bill.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
I bet. So how does that factor into all of this?
Well, the bill basically says that 1/3 of all seats in Parliament got to be reserved for women.
Okay.
Which is amazing,
Yeah.
right? Huge step towards more equal representation.
Yeah, definitely. But how does that work with delimitation?
That's the tricky part. It doesn't actually say which constituencies those seats should be.
So if you've already redrawn the map based on population and suddenly you have to set aside 1/3 of the seats for women.
It's going to cause some major shuffling around.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, do they have to redraw the boundaries again?
Right.
Will some MPs lose their seats?
Especially if they were counting on those safe seats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a logistical and political nightmare.
And don't forget about the costs involved with all this redrawing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then there's the whole question of what happens to those MPs who lose their seats.
Yeah, like if a constituency that was represented by a man is now reserved for a woman.
Right. Does he automatically lose his job? What about his pension? It raises a lot of questions.
And I bet this is making those states that are already worried about losing representation even more nervous.
You bet. It's like adding fuel to the fire.
It's fascinating to see how all the different political parties are reacting to this.
It is. So what's happening out there in the real world?
Well, Tamil Nadu's called for an all-party meeting to talk about their concerns.
Oh, yeah. They're not happy about potentially losing seats.
Not at all. They feel like they're being punished for managing their population well.
And they're not the only ones. Karnataka's chief minister has also spoken out against this.
Yeah, he's worried that delimitation will hurt states that have been responsible.
It's a matter of fairness, he says.
It sounds like the southern states are ready to fight for their representation.
They are. And some states are taking things even further.
What do you mean?
Well, Andhra Pradesh just reversed a law that limited how many kids a couple could have.
Wow, really?
Yep. Seems like they're trying to boost their population before the next delimitation happens.
So they're thinking strategically.
Oh, yeah. It's like a game of political chess.
It's crazy to think that this debate is actually shaping policies at the state level.
It is. This isn't just some theoretical discussion. It's having real-world consequences.
So with all these competing interests and different solutions, what do you think is going to happen? What's the end game here?
Honestly, it's hard to say. This is a really complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, I can see that.
But one thing's for sure, whatever decisions are made during this delimitation process, they're going to have a huge impact on India's future.
It feels like we're at a turning point.
We are. These choices are going to shape the political landscape for years to come.
And it's about more than just numbers and boundaries.
Right. It's about fairness and equality, making sure that every citizen feels like their vote counts.
It's about the foundation of democracy.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It forces us to really think about what it means to have a representative democracy.
It's a reminder that this isn't just an Indian issue. It's something that all democracies are dealing with.
That's right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key things you want our listener to take away from this conversation?
So much to consider.
Well, first and foremost, I want to make sure folks realize, this isn't just an Indian problem.
Really?
This is something that democracies all over the world are dealing with.
Yeah.
How do you make sure everyone's represented fairly when populations are constantly changing?
It's the million-dollar question.
It really is. And there's no magic bullet, no easy answer.
No. It seems like every solution has some kind of downside.
Exactly. But that's why it's so important to keep talking about this stuff. You know? We got to stay informed and be open to different viewpoints.
I agree. And it's not just up to politicians and experts to figure this out.
Absolutely not. We all have a role to play.
So what can the average person do?
Well, for starters, educate yourself on the issues.
Okay.
Get involved in your community. Make your voice heard.
It all comes back to the power of the vote.
It does. At the end of the day, delimitation is about making sure that every vote counts.
Earlier, you mentioned that other countries are facing similar challenges. Are there any countries that have handled this well? Like someone India could learn from?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are definitely some examples out there.
Oh, like who?
Well, Germany's got this independent commission that handles delimitation.
Okay.
So that's less influenced by politics.
Makes sense.
And in Australia, they review their electoral boundaries pretty regularly.
So they don't run into this problem of things being outdated for decades.
Exactly. Those are just a couple of examples, but there are others out there.
So there's no one right answer, but there are definitely things India can learn from other countries.
That's the takeaway. And, even though this is a really complex issue, I think it's also an opportunity for India.
How so?
It's a chance to make their democracy even stronger, to make sure every citizen feels represented.
It's a chance to build a more fair and equal system.
Exactly. It's like you said earlier, democracy is a work in progress.
Always evolving, always getting better, hopefully.
That's the spirit. So to our listener out there, remember, this isn't just something happening far away. This is about the future of democracy, and your understanding, your participation, it all matters.
It's a call to action.
It is.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much about Indian politics and democracy in general.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into delimitation in India.
Absolutely.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And hopefully it'll inspire you to learn even more.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.